A bankrupt veteran's discovery of a massive diamond deposit in his inherited coal mine that would change the course of his life forever. How a father's struggle to provide for his family led to an astonishing find worth hundreds of millions, hidden just beyond a collapsed wall that most had dismissed as worthless. The remarkable story of perseverance, faith, and the unexpected treasure that was waiting all along. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Rain pounded against the windshield as Jackson Reed drove his beaten-up pickup truck along the winding mountain roads of eastern Kentucky. The wipers struggled against the downpour, much like Jackson had been struggling against the mounting debts that threatened to consume what little he had left. At 36, the former Army Ranger and father of two had returned from his third deployment with a purple heart, a persistent limp from shrapnel in his right leg, and skills that didn't easily translate to the civilian job market. "Are we almost there, Dad?" asked 10-year-old Emma from the back seat, her voice barely audible above the storm. Beside her, 7-year-old Liam pressed his face against the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. "Almost, sweetheart," Jackson replied, forcing optimism into his voice. Uncle Roy's place should be just around this bend. 3 weeks earlier, Jackson had received a certified letter informing him that his reclusive great-uncle Roy Reed had passed away, leaving him sole ownership of what the letter described as all mining properties and related equipment in Pinecrest County. Jackson had met his great-uncle only twice, once as a child and once before his first deployment. He remembered a gruff, solitary man with coal dust seemingly embedded in the creases of his weathered face. Jackson had no illusions about what he was inheriting. The eastern Kentucky coalfields had been in decline for decades. Whatever his uncle had left him was likely to be worthless and abandoned mine, outdated equipment, and possibly more liabilities than assets. But with bankruptcy proceedings threatening to take their modest rental home in Lexington, and no steady work since the construction company he'd been with folded 6 months ago, even a slim chance at a fresh start seemed worth investigating. "There it is," Jackson said as they rounded the corner, pointing to a small cabin perched on the hillside. Below it, partially hidden by pine trees, stood a collection of dilapidated outbuildings and what appeared to be the entrance to a mine shaft, its timbers gray with age. "That's it?" Sarah Reed asked quietly from the passenger seat, her expression carefully neutral. At 34, she had supported Jackson through his military service, his struggles with PTSD, and now their financial collapse. She had sold her beloved piano 3 months ago to keep the electricity on. "It looks abandoned." Uncle Roy was a loner, Jackson reminded her. Lived out here by himself for almost 40 years after the main mining operations shut down. The lawyer said he kept doing small-scale operations on his own. As they pulled up to the cabin, a tall man in a rain slicker emerged from the shelter of the porch. "You must be Jackson," he called, hustling toward them with an umbrella. "I'm Ben Harlow, used to help your uncle with maintenance and supply runs. Been keeping an eye on the place since he passed." Minutes later, they were inside the surprisingly cozy cabin, warming themselves by a wood stove while Ben explained the situation. "Roy was the last holdout," he said, accepting a cup of coffee from Sarah, who had immediately located the kitchen and put on a pot. When the Pinecrest Coal Company closed down their operation in the 80s, they offered to buy out all the private claim holders in the area. Everyone sold except Roy. "Why?" Jackson asked. Ben shrugged. "Roy always said this mountain had secrets. Said his daddy and granddaddy knew it too. 3 generations of Reeds worked this claim, all convinced there was something special here. The company men thought he was crazy, holding onto a depleted coal seam." After getting settled in the cabin, Jackson asked Ben to show him the mine. The rain had lessened to a drizzle as they walked down the muddy path to the main entrance. It's structurally sound, Ben assured him. Roy was meticulous about safety. Installed modern supports about 15 years ago. Keeps the generator maintained for ventilation and lighting. When was the last time anyone actually mined anything? Jackson asked, eyeing the entrance skeptically. Roy worked it till about 6 months ago, before his health took a turn. Nothing major. He'd extract enough coal to sell to locals for heating, make enough to get by. He was down to working just the east shaft. Said the west shaft was played out decades ago. Inside, the mine was eerily quiet, except for the occasional drip of water. The main shaft extended about 200 yards before branching east and west. Ben switched on the generator, and strings of work lights illuminated the tunnels. This is it. Jackson couldn't keep the disappointment from his voice. This is what I uprooted my family for. It's more than you had yesterday, Ben said mildly. Cabins paid off, that good hunting land, clean water from the spring. Roy lived simply, but he wasn't suffering. Jackson sighed. He'd been foolish to hope for more. A worthless coal mine wasn't going to solve his family's problems, but Ben was right. It was shelter, a place to regroup. Maybe he could find work in the nearest town while figuring out their next move. That evening, after the children were asleep in the cabin's small second bedroom, Jackson and Sarah sat at the kitchen table, reviewing their finances by lamplight. We've got enough savings to last maybe 2 months, Sarah said, her finger tracing down columns of numbers in their worn checkbook. If you can find work in town, in a county with 30% unemployment. Jackson shook his head. I asked Ben about the job market. It's grim. The mine is all we've got. Could we sell it? Who'd buy a depleted coal mine in a region full of them? The property itself might fetch something, but not enough to clear our debts. Sarah reached across the table, taking his hand. We've faced worse, Jack. We'll figure this out. The next morning, determined to fully understand what he'd inherited, Jackson returned to the mine alone. He spent hours exploring the east shaft where his uncle had last worked, familiarizing himself with the equipment and assessing what coal remained. By mid-afternoon, he reluctantly concluded that Ben's assessment was accurate. There was coal, but not in quantities that would sustain them. Out of a sense of thoroughness, he decided to examine the west shaft before heading back to the cabin. Ben had mentioned it was played out, but Jackson wanted to see for himself. The tunnel was narrower, the supports older, though still solid. About 50 yards in, he came to what appeared to be a dead end. A rockfall had collapsed part of the tunnel. As Jackson turned to leave, his headlamp caught something odd about the collapse. Unlike a natural cave-in, which would typically result in a chaotic pile of debris, this blockage appeared almost deliberate. The rocks were stacked in a way that suggested human intervention. Curious, Jackson moved closer, examining the wall of rock. Some of the stones shifted under his touch, revealing that the blockage wasn't as solid as it first appeared. Intrigued, Jackson began carefully removing rocks, creating a small opening. Behind the makeshift wall, the tunnel continued. What the hell, Uncle Roy? Jackson muttered, widening the hole enough to squeeze through. On the other side, the tunnel extended another 20 yards before opening into a small chamber. Jackson's headlamp illuminated what appeared to be a mining face, but something about the rock looked strange. Rather than the dull black of coal, parts of the wall glinted in the light, reflecting tiny rainbow-colored sparkles. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jackson approached the wall, his heart suddenly racing. He'd seen enough geology during his time stationed in Afghanistan to recognize what he was looking at. Embedded in the rock wall were dozens, no, hundreds of what appeared to be rough diamonds, some as small as pinheads, others the size of pebbles. The kimberlite pipe, a geological formation known to contain diamonds, was unmistakable once you knew what you were looking at. "Oh my God," he whispered, his voice echoing in the empty chamber. With shaking hands, he chipped loose a small fragment of rock containing several of the crystalline structures and stared at it in disbelief. If he was right, if these really were diamonds. But why would Uncle Roy block off this section of the mine? Why not extract the diamonds? Jackson carefully pocketed the sample and made his way back through the hole in the rockfall. Before heading back to the cabin, he meticulously replaced the stones, concealing the passage as his uncle had done. That night, after the children were asleep, Jackson showed Sarah the rock fragment under the bright kitchen light. "I'm no expert," he said cautiously, "but I think these are diamonds. And there's a whole wall of them back there." Sarah stared at the glittering specimens, then at her husband's face. "Jack, are you sure? I mean, diamonds. In a Kentucky coal mine? That's not. Is that even possible?" Geologically, yes. Kimberlite pipes, the formations that contain diamonds, can be found in various parts of North America. They're rare but not unheard of. But if Uncle Roy knew about this, why didn't he mine them? Why wall it off? Jackson shook his head. "I don't know. But I think we need to find out more before we tell anyone about this." The next day, while Sarah took the children into town for supplies, Jackson drove 2 hours to the nearest city with a university, seeking out the geology department. He introduced himself to Dr. Elaine Chun, a professor of mineralogy. Claiming to be researching unusual formations for potential property development, Dr. Chun examined the sample with professional curiosity, then growing excitement. "Where exactly did you find this?" she asked, looking up from her microscope. "Eastern Kentucky. Private property," Jackson replied vaguely. "Is it what I think it is? If you're thinking diamonds, yes. And quite pure specimens at that." She adjusted her glasses. "This is extremely unusual for the region. May I ask the specific location?" "I'd rather not say just yet. The landowner is cautious." Jackson hesitated. How valuable would something like this be? Dr. Chun chose her words carefully. Without knowing the extent of the deposit, it's impossible to give an accurate assessment. But diamonds of this quality are currently valued at several $1,000s per carat in their rough state. If the deposit is substantial. Jackson thanked her and left with his sample, his mind racing. On the drive back, he struggled to process the implications. They weren't just sitting on a few gemstones. If the chamber was as diamond-rich as it appeared, they could be looking at millions. But why had Uncle Roy concealed the discovery? And what should they do now? Back at the cabin, Jackson shared the professor's confirmation with Sarah. "We need to be careful about how we proceed," he cautioned. "If word gets out before we secure our legal position, we could lose everything." Sarah nodded slowly, the enormity of their situation beginning to sink in. "We should talk to a lawyer. Someone not from around here, someone who specializes in mining rights." The following week was a blur of discreet research and preparations. Jackson found a respected mining attorney in Louisville who agreed to meet them confidentially. The lawyer, Gloria Hammond, reviewed Uncle Roy's deed and the relevant mining regulations with meticulous care. "The situation is unusual but legally straightforward," she explained in her elegant office. "Your uncle's claim was never part of the larger coal company's holdings. He maintained independent mineral rights, which have now passed to you. Any resources found within the claim boundaries are yours to extract, subject to proper permits and environmental regulations. And if we wanted to begin..." "Extraction?" Sarah asked. "That's more complicated. You'd need capital, equipment, expertise. Diamond mining isn't like coal, it requires specialized knowledge and technology. Your best option might be to partner with an established mining company, or sell the rights while retaining a significant royalty arrangement." As they left the attorney's office, Jackson felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. The find was legitimate, and it was theirs. But questions remained about his uncle's strange behavior. Why hide such a valuable discovery? The answer came unexpectedly, in the form of a weathered journal they found hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the cabin's main room. Jackson discovered it while replacing a damaged section of flooring, the small leather-bound book wrapped in oilcloth and tucked carefully away. The journal, spanning nearly 4 decades, chronicled Roy Reed's life at the mine. The early entries described his determination to continue the family business despite the decline of coal. Then, dated 22 years earlier, a triumphant entry described his discovery of the diamond-bearing kimberlite pipe while extending the west shaft. But the subsequent entries revealed why he had concealed the find. Roy had witnessed firsthand how the large coal company had manipulated and ultimately destroyed the local community, buying out struggling miners for a fraction of their claim's worth, polluting the water and leaving when profits dwindled. He wrote of corporate vultures and his determination that the diamonds would not become another resource that enriched outsiders while leaving the region poorer. The wealth beneath this mountain doesn't belong to shareholders in New York or London, Roy had written. It belongs to the people who've suffered here, who've had everything else taken from them. I won't be the one to bring another curse upon this land. The final pages contained what appeared to be Roy's plan, a detailed vision for how the diamond resource could be developed responsibly, with majority ownership and profits remaining in the community, creating sustainable jobs and infrastructure rather than a short-term boom followed by the familiar bust. He had been waiting, it seemed, for the right moment and the right people to entrust with his vision. He was protecting it, Sarah said softly after they'd read the journal together. Not just hoarding it for himself. He was waiting until it could be done right. Jackson nodded, a new understanding of his uncle taking shape. And now that responsibility falls to us. Over the next few days, they discussed their options extensively. The easy path would be to sell to the highest bidder, clear their debts, and live comfortably. But Uncle Roy's words haunted them, as did their own experiences with struggling communities left behind by extractive industries. What if we tried to honor his vision? Jackson suggested. Create a community-owned enterprise? It would be harder, take longer, but... Sarah squeezed his hand. It feels right. But we'd need help, expertise. Their first step was contacting Ben Harlow, who had been Uncle Roy's most trusted friend. When they showed him the diamond-bearing rock and explained their discovery, Ben wasn't surprised. I suspected something like this, he admitted. Roy hinted at it over the years. Said he was guarding a treasure for the future. I thought it might be gold, but diamonds. That's something else entirely. With Ben's help, they assembled a small group of trusted locals, a retired mining engineer, a community organizer who had fought for miners' rights, an environmental scientist committed to sustainable development, and the former high school principal who now ran the region's only credit union. Together, they began crafting a plan that would honor Roy's vision while creating something new. Their concept was ambitious, a community benefit corporation that would develop the diamond mine with majority local ownership. They would seek outside investment and expertise, but with strict protections ensuring that profits and decision-making power remained, primarily with the people of Pinecrest County. The planning process was arduous, with countless late nights around the cabin's kitchen table. They consulted experts in ethical mining, community development, and corporate governance. They drafted bylaws that would prevent any future sale that didn't protect community interests. 3 months after Jackson's discovery, they were ready to take their first public steps. They had secured preliminary financing from a coalition of impact investors interested in their unique model. They had completed the necessary geological surveys to confirm the extent of the deposit, conservatively estimated at $330 million in rough diamonds, with potential for more as exploration continued. On a crisp autumn morning, Jackson stood before a gathering of Pinecrest County residents in the high school gymnasium. The crowd was skeptical at first. They had heard promises before, seen outsiders come with grand plans that ultimately benefited everyone but them. "I'm not here to make promises I can't keep," Jackson began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I'm here because my uncle, Roy Reed, left me more than just a mine. He left me a vision of how things could be different." As Jackson explained the diamond discovery and their plans for community ownership, the mood in the room shifted from skepticism to cautious hope. When he invited questions, they were pointed and practical. These were people who had learned the hard way not to trust easily. "How do we know you won't just sell out once things get running?" asked an older man in the front row, a former miner with the telltale black lung cough. "Because we're structuring this so I can't," Jackson explained. "The legal framework we're creating gives permanent majority control to the community trust. I'll have no more power to sell out than any of you." By the end of the meeting, they had their first round of local investors, people putting in what they could, from $50 to several $1,000s, to be part of something that might finally break the cycle of poverty and exploitation that had defined the region for generations. The path forward wasn't smooth. They faced opposition from conventional mining companies interested in acquiring the rights. They navigated complex regulations and the challenges of creating a genuinely sustainable operation. But step by step, the Pinecrest Community Diamond Company took shape. 6 months after the discovery, they broke ground on the initial development phase. A year later, they extracted their first commercial diamonds, beautiful, conflict-free gems marketed specifically for their ethical origins and community benefits. For Jackson and Sarah Reed, the journey transformed more than just their financial situation. The worthless inheritance that had seemed like their last resort had become the foundation for a new kind of community wealth. The diamonds hadn't just saved their family. They had provided an opportunity to demonstrate that resources could be developed in ways that prioritize people over short-term profits. Standing at the viewing platform overlooking the carefully developed mine site, watching as community members, now co-owners, went about their work with pride and purpose, Jackson reflected on the strange path that had led them here. His military training had taught him to recognize value in unexpected places, to see possibilities where others saw only obstacles. Uncle Roy had seen the same potential, not just in the diamonds, but in the people of this place. "Dad, come look," Emma called, now 11 and fascinated by the mining operation. "They just brought up a new section from the East Chamber." As Jackson joined his daughter, watching her excitement as she pointed out the glittering crystals embedded in the rock, he silently thanked his uncle for the true inheritance he'd left behind, not just wealth, but the opportunity to build something meaningful from what others had dismissed as worthless. The bankrupt veteran who had arrived desperate and defeated had found more than diamonds behind that collapsed wall. He had found a purpose, a community, and a chance to demonstrate that sometimes the most valuable discoveries aren't the treasures themselves, but what we choose to do with them. 2 months after the groundbreaking ceremony for the Pinecrest Community Diamond Company, Jackson found himself standing before a gathering of potential investors in Louisville. The conference room of the upscale hotel was filled with serious-faced men and women in expensive suits. Their attention focused intently on the former Army Ranger who, until recently, had been on the brink of financial ruin. "What makes the Pinecrest deposit unique," Jackson explained, indicating the geological cross-sections displayed on the screen behind him, "isn't just its unexpected location in eastern Kentucky. It's the unusual concentration of gem-quality stones within a relatively accessible formation." He clicked to the next slide, showing a collection of rough diamonds spread across black velvet. "Our initial extraction has yielded diamonds averaging 2-3 carats, with exceptional clarity and color profiles." A silver-haired man in the front row raised his hand. "Your community ownership model is unconventional, Why should we invest when our return potential is capped by your structure? Jackson had anticipated this question. Because our model actually reduces your risk while offering competitive returns. By ensuring that profits flow back into the community, we've secured unprecedented local support. No protests, no litigation, no sabotage. Our operation has all necessary permits and strong political backing from both parties. Moreover, he added, our ethical sourcing certification allows us to command premium prices in a market increasingly concerned with diamond provenance. As Jackson continued fielding questions, Sarah watched from the back of the room, barely recognizing the confident speaker as the same man who, just months ago, had sat at their kitchen table with his head in his hands, wondering how they would keep the electricity on. The transformation wasn't just in their circumstances, but in Jackson himself. The purpose he'd struggled to find after leaving the military had finally materialized. After the presentation, while Jackson was surrounded by interested investors, Sarah slipped out to call home. Emma and Liam were staying with Ben Harlow and his wife during their 3-day trip to Louisville. "How are the kids?" she asked when Ben answered. "Having the time of their lives," Ben chuckled. "Liam helped me fix the tractor this morning, and Emma's been collecting rock samples for her science project." "They're fine, Sarah. How's the investor meeting going?" "Better than we expected. There's serious interest from at least 3 groups. Any of them pushing back on the community ownership structure?" "Some concerns, but Jackson's handling them well." Sarah paused. "Ben, I'm worried about how fast this is all moving. 6 months ago, we were facing bankruptcy, and now we're discussing million-dollar investments. It doesn't seem real." "Roy always said the mountain had its own timeline," Ben replied thoughtfully. "Maybe this is how it was meant to unfold." That evening in their hotel room, Jackson and Sarah reviewed the day's events. They had secured tentative commitments for nearly $15 million in investment capital, enough to fully develop the initial mining operation. "We did it," Jackson said, loosening his tie and collapsing onto the bed. "We actually did it." Sarah sat beside him, taking his hand. "I'm proud of you, Jack, but are you sure we're doing the right thing? The way you talked about returns and market positioning today, it's so far from what we imagined when we found Uncle Roy's journal." Jackson sat up, meeting her eyes. "The community trust still maintains controlling interest. The profit-sharing model is unchanged. Yes, we're using the language investors understand, but the core vision remains intact, I promise you that." "I know, Sarah hesitated. "I worry about what happens when the novelty wears off. When we're just another mining operation trying to make quarterly numbers. Then we'll remind ourselves why we started this," Jackson said firmly. "And we have safeguards in place, the board structure, the community oversight committee. We've built something that can withstand pressure." The following week brought new challenges as news of the diamond discovery spread beyond their controlled disclosures. A reporter from a regional business journal published a feature on the Kentucky Diamond Rush, complete with speculation about the deposit's value and history. Within days, the quiet town of Pinecrest was inundated with prospectors, fortune seekers, and media. The single diner on Main Street was suddenly packed from dawn until closing. The small motel had a waiting list 3 weeks long, and locals were renting spare rooms at premium prices. "We need to address this," Meredith Collins, the former high school principal and now CFO of the company, said during an emergency meeting at the mine office. "People are staking claims all over the county, harassing landowners, trespassing on private property. Most of them don't understand geology," remarked Dr. Wilson, their environmental scientist. "Kimberlite pipes are discrete formations. They're not going to find diamonds scattered across the mountainside." "They don't know that," Jackson pointed out. "And some of them are representing serious interests. I've been approached by 3 different mining companies in the past week, all suggesting that our amateur operation would be better served by selling to professionals. The team decided on a two-pronged approach. First, they would hold a public information session to address misconceptions about the deposit and clarify the legal boundaries of their claim. Second, they would accelerate their hiring and training programs for local residents, creating a visible economic impact that would strengthen community support. The information session, held in the same high school gymnasium where they had first announced their plans, drew hundreds of attendees, including many unfamiliar faces. Jackson stood at the podium, flanked by maps and geological diagrams. "Let me be clear about several points," he began. "First, the diamond-bearing formation is contained entirely within the legal boundaries of the Reed family claim, which dates back to 1887. Second, this is not a surface deposit. These diamonds can't be panned or picked up from streambeds. They require specialized extraction techniques. And third," he paused, making eye contact with several individuals he recognized as corporate representatives, "the Pinecrest Community Diamond Company is not for sale. Not now, not ever." A murmur ran through the crowd. A man in a crisp blazer stood up. "Isn't it irresponsible to leave such a valuable resource in the hands of inexperienced operators? Your community might be better served by professionals who could maximize extraction efficiency." "That argument might hold water," Jackson replied evenly, "if efficiency was our only concern. But our company exists to balance multiple priorities: sustainable extraction, environmental protection, and most importantly, ensuring that the wealth created stays in this community. We've assembled a team of experienced professionals who share those values." Despite their clear messaging, pressure continued to mount. Anonymous buyers began approaching elderly landowners adjacent to the mine property, offering cash for their homes and land. Rumors circulated about potential legal challenges to the Reed claim's boundaries. And one morning, they arrived at the mine to find their access road blocked by fallen trees that showed clear evidence of chainsaw cuts. "Someone's trying to slow us down," Ben observed as they worked to clear the road. "Or send a message," Jackson agreed grimly. That evening, Jackson received an unexpected visitor at the cabin. A sleek black SUV with tinted windows pulled up the driveway, and a tall, distinguished-looking man in his 60s emerged. He introduced himself as Richard Hargrove, CEO of Continental Resource Partners, one of the largest mining conglomerates in North America. "I appreciate you seeing me without an appointment," Hargrove said smoothly as Jackson reluctantly invited him inside. "I wanted to speak with you privately, away from your advisors and board members." "About what?" Jackson asked, remaining standing as Hargrove settled himself at the kitchen table. "I'll be direct, Mr. Reed. What you've discovered is potentially extraordinary. But bringing a diamond mine to full production requires expertise, equipment, and capital far beyond what your community organization can muster. The technical challenges alone would overwhelm most established mining companies." "We've got good people," Jackson replied. "And sufficient investment." Hargrove smiled thinly. "For phase one, perhaps. But what about when you hit the water table? Or when the formation changes and you need adaptive extraction methods? What about international marketing and distribution? These aren't challenges you can overcome with local determination, however admirable that may be." He opened a leather portfolio and slid a document across the table. "Continental is prepared to offer $300 million for a 60% stake in the operation. You would retain meaningful ownership. We would employ local workers wherever possible, and your community would benefit from our established infrastructure and expertise." Jackson glanced at the proposal but didn't touch it. "Mr. Hargrove, I appreciate your directness. So let me be equally direct. This mine isn't just an asset to be monetized. It's the foundation for a new economic model in a region that's been exploited and abandoned by companies like yours for generations. We're not interested in your offer, regardless of the dollar amount." Hargrove's affable expression hardened slightly. "I understand your idealism, Mr. Reed, many of us start with similar notions. But the reality of the global resource market doesn't leave much room for alternative models. You'll face challenges you haven't anticipated. When those arise, my offer remains open, though perhaps not at this same valuation. After Hargrove left, Jackson called an emergency meeting of their core team. As they gathered in the mine office that evening, he recounted the conversation. "It won't be the last approach," Meredith warned. "Once Continental gets involved, others will follow." "Can they challenge our claim legally?" Sarah asked. Dr. Wilson shook his head. "The Reed family claim is ironclad. It predates modern mining regulations and was specifically excluded from the consolidated operations when Pinecrest Coal sold out. That's why they're trying to buy in rather than contest ownership." "But Hargrove wasn't wrong about the technical challenges," Ben pointed out. "We're still learning as we go." "Then we need to learn faster," Jackson decided. "And we need to accelerate community integration. The more people who have a direct stake in our success, the harder it will be for outside interests to gain a foothold." Over the following weeks, they implemented an aggressive expansion of their training programs, partnering with the community college in the next county to develop specialized courses in diamond mining and processing. They established a transparent profit-sharing system that distributed quarterly returns to all community shareholders. And they hired a dedicated security team to protect the mine site. The pressure from outside interests took more subtle forms. Banking relationships suddenly became complicated, with their local credit union facing unusual scrutiny from regulatory authorities. Permit applications that should have been routine were delayed by requests for additional environmental studies. And anonymous social media campaigns began spreading misinformation about the company's practices and intentions. Through it all, Jackson and Sarah worked tirelessly to maintain their original vision. They held weekly town halls to address community concerns. They invited independent auditors to verify their environmental and financial practices. And they continued to develop the mine methodically, focusing on sustainable extraction rather than maximum short-term yield. 6 months into full production, they faced their first major crisis. During an expansion of the East Chamber, miners encountered a substantial underground spring. Water began flooding the lower levels of the mine, threatening both operations and safety. "This could set us back months," the lead engineer reported during an emergency meeting. "We need specialized equipment to manage this volume of water, and our current pumping systems can't handle it." "What are our options?" Jackson asked, studying the diagrams of the affected areas. "Continental Resources has the equipment we need," Ben said reluctantly. "I checked with every independent supplier in a 3-state radius. Nothing else suitable is available on short notice." "Hargrove will see this as vindication," Sarah warned. "He specifically mentioned water table issues." Jackson weighed their options. Approaching Continental for equipment would create a dependency they had fought to avoid. But delaying operations would strain their financial resources and potentially undermine community confidence. After hours of discussion, they decided on a third approach. Rather than renting equipment from Continental, they would reach out to other independent mining operations across the country, forming a cooperative equipment-sharing network. It would take longer and require more coordination, but it would preserve their independence. While they implemented this solution, they faced another challenge. A front-page story in a national business publication questioned the economic viability of their community ownership model, citing industry experts who predicted the operation would collapse within a year. The article didn't mention that several of these experts had direct ties to large mining conglomerates. "They're trying to shake investor confidence," Meredith observed as they discussed the article. "If our financing falls through, they can swoop in with a rescue offer." "Then we need to show undeniable results," Jackson decided. "Let's move up the date for our first major gem auction. We'll let the diamonds speak for themselves." The auction, held in New York with significant media coverage, exceeded even their optimistic projections. The Pinecrest diamonds, marketed explicitly as community-sourced and ethically extracted, commanded premium prices from buyers increasingly conscious of provenance issues in the diamond industry. Several stones set per-carat records for their color and clarity categories. "This changes the narrative," Sarah said as they reviewed the results in their hotel room that evening. "Now we're not just an idealistic experiment, we're a market success." "It buys us time," Jackson agreed. "But the fundamental challenges remain. We're still smaller than the major players, still learning aspects of the business, still vulnerable to pressure." "Maybe that's our permanent state," Sarah suggested thoughtfully. "Maybe the point isn't to become invulnerable, but to demonstrate that vulnerability doesn't have to mean surrender." As they prepared to return to Kentucky, Jackson received an unexpected message. Richard Hargrove wanted to meet again, this time in a public restaurant rather than at the cabin. Curious about this new approach, Jackson agreed. Hargrove was already seated when Jackson arrived at the upscale steakhouse. The older man stood, offering his hand with what appeared to be genuine respect. "Congratulations on the auction," Hargrove said as they sat. "Impressive results, particularly for a first offering." "Thank you," Jackson replied cautiously. "I assume this isn't just a social lunch to offer congratulations." Hargrove smiled. "Direct as always." "No, it's not. I wanted to acknowledge that my previous assessment of your operation was incomplete. You've demonstrated viability that many in the industry, myself included, didn't anticipate." "And?" Jackson prompted, sensing there was more. "And I'd like to propose a different kind of relationship, not acquisition, but partnership. Continental has extraction technology that could significantly enhance your yield while reducing environmental impact. We have distribution channels that could complement your direct auction approach. What we don't have is your community model, which has proven more successful than conventional approaches in securing social license to operate." Jackson studied the older man, trying to discern his true motives. "You're suggesting we collaborate rather than compete? Why the change of heart?" Hargrove leaned back, considering his words carefully. "Let's call it an evolution in thinking. The industry is changing. Consumer preferences are shifting toward ethical sourcing. Regulatory environments increasingly favor operations with strong community support. What you've built in Pinecrest represents an adaptation that traditional mining companies need to understand, not eliminate." "And what would this partnership entail, specifically?" Jackson asked. "Technology transfer, market access, capital if needed, but no ownership stake, no control over your governance structure. A genuine collaboration between different but complementary approaches." The proposal was unexpected enough that Jackson promised only to discuss it with his team, making no commitments. When he returned to Pinecrest and shared the conversation, reactions were mixed. "It could be a Trojan horse," Ben warned. "Get us dependent on their technology, then leverage that to gain influence." "Or it could be exactly what he said," Dr. Wilson countered. "The industry is evolving. Even the majors recognize that social license is increasingly valuable." "Either way, it represents a significant shift," Meredith noted. "From trying to absorb us to acknowledging our model has value they can't easily replicate." After extensive discussion, they decided to proceed with a limited trial collaboration, allowing Continental to demonstrate their water management technology in one section of the mine, while maintaining complete operational independence. The collaboration, carefully structured and monitored, proved surprisingly beneficial. The advanced pumping systems developed by Continental allowed them to access diamond-rich sections of the formation that would otherwise have been prohibitively expensive to reach. And Continental gained valuable insights into community engagement approaches that they began implementing at other operations. 1 year after Jackson had first discovered the diamonds behind the collapsed wall, the Pinecrest Community Diamond Company had evolved from a desperate gamble into a stable enterprise, employing over 200 local residents. The community trust had distributed its first profit-sharing payments, providing meaningful income to families throughout the county. And the model had attracted attention from regions facing similar challenges of resource development and community benefit. Standing at the observation point overlooking the mine, Jackson reflected on the journey. The path had been neither as straightforward as they'd initially hoped, nor as impossible as their critics had predicted. They had maintained their core principles while adapting to realities they couldn't have anticipated. They had discovered that independence didn't have to mean isolation, and that maintaining their vision required both firmness and flexibility. "Penny for your thoughts," Sarah said, joining him at the railing. "Just thinking about Uncle Roy," Jackson replied, wondering if he'd approve of where we've taken his legacy. Sarah considered this. He wanted the diamonds to benefit the community, not outside interests. He wanted sustainable development, not exploitation. "I think we've honored that, even if our approach isn't exactly what he envisioned." Jackson nodded, watching as the shift changed below, miners emerging from the main entrance while others prepared to descend. Local faces, people he now knew by name, people whose lives had been transformed just as thoroughly as his own. "The real inheritance wasn't the diamonds," he said quietly. "It was the chance to prove that another way is possible. That resources can be developed without destroying the places and people they come from." As they turned to leave, Jackson spotted Emma and Liam approaching with their school backpacks. The children had adjusted to their new life with remarkable resilience, finding their places in the close-knit community. Emma had developed a passionate interest in geology, while Liam had become the unofficial mascot of the maintenance team, absorbing technical knowledge with sponge-like enthusiasm. "Dad, Mom," Emma called, waving a paper excitedly. "My diamond formation project won first place in the science fair. Ms. Johnson says I should enter it in the state competition." As Jackson embraced his daughter, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. The worthless coal mine had yielded far more than diamonds. It had given his family a future, his community a new path, and himself a purpose that honored both his military service and his deepest values. The bankrupt veteran had found wealth beyond measure, not just in the glittering crystals embedded in the rock, but in the realization that true value often lies hidden, waiting for someone with the courage to look beyond the obvious and the persistence to break through the walls that conceal it. The diamond discovery at Pinecrest had attracted more than just mining companies and investors. 3 years after Jackson Reed first found the hidden chamber, the once quiet Appalachian town had transformed into a bustling hub of activity. New businesses lined Main Street, a farm-to-table restaurant, a craft brewery, a boutique hotel catering to diamond industry visitors. The elementary school, once facing closure due to declining enrollment, now had waiting lists for each grade as families moved to the area for the stable jobs and growing opportunities. On this particular spring morning, Jackson stood at the edge of the newly completed community center, watching as workers installed the final panel in the solar array that would power the building. The structure, with its modern lines complementing traditional Appalachian architectural elements, represented everything the Pinecrest community, Diamond Company had sought to achieve: sustainable development that honored local culture while embracing innovation. "Quite a change from the leaky gymnasium where we held our first town meeting," remarked Eliza Donovan, stepping up beside him. The former environmental activist had initially been one of their most vocal skeptics, convinced that any extractive industry would inevitably exploit the region. Now she served as their sustainability director, ensuring that the operation maintained the highest environmental standards. "Hard to believe it's been 3 years, Jackson agreed, watching a group of schoolchildren tour the building's rain garden. "Sometimes I still expect to wake up in that rental in Lexington, wondering how to make the next payment." "Your uncle would be proud," Eliza said. "Not just of the mine, but of everything that's grown around it." The community center was only one of many development projects funded by the Diamond Operation's success. A state-of-the-art medical clinic had reduced emergency response times from 45 minutes to under 10. The expanded community college branch offered specialized training in gemology, sustainable mining practices, and environmental remediation. And the community-owned broadband network provided high-speed internet to homes that previously couldn't get reliable cell service. Jackson's phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. Emergency meeting at the office. Continental proposal just came in. He sighed, the moment of satisfaction interrupted by the persistent reality of business. Duty calls, he told Eliza. The dedication ceremony still on for 2 o'clock? Everything's ready, she confirmed. The governor's office called to confirm his attendance, and the school choir has been practicing for weeks. The mine offices, housed in a renovated warehouse at the edge of town, buzzed with activity as Jackson arrived. The core leadership team had gathered in the conference room, expressions ranging from concerned to intrigued. What's Continental proposing now? Jackson asked as he took his seat beside Sarah. Meredith Collins slid a thick document across the table. Full acquisition. $500 million, all cash, with guarantees of continued local employment and environmental practices. That's significantly more than their last offer, Ben observed. They're responding to our latest geological survey, Dr. Wilson explained, pulling up a 3D model on the wall screen. The new imaging confirms what we suspected. The kimberlite pipe extends much deeper than initially estimated, with increasing diamond concentration at depth. Conservatively, we're looking at $1 billion resource. Jackson studied the model, noting the areas they had already developed and the vast potential that remained untapped. And they're proposing to buy us now, just as we've confirmed the deposit's true value. Their timing is strategic, Sarah noted. We're approaching a major decision point on expansion. Developing the deeper sections will require capital investment beyond anything we've previously undertaken. What's our financial position? Jackson asked, turning to Meredith. The CFO consulted her tablet. Strong, but not unlimited. We've maintained profitability while funding community development at an aggressive pace. To access the deeper deposits would require approximately $70 million in new equipment and infrastructure. We could finance it, but it would slow our community investment for at least 2 years. And Continental has the capital ready to deploy, Ben added. They could accelerate development while we'd have to pace ourselves. There's something else, Dr. Wilson said, his usually calm demeanor troubled. The deeper sections present significant technical challenges. We're talking about mining at depths where temperature and pressure complicate extraction. Continental has experience with these conditions that we don't. Jackson absorbed this information, weighing their options. The company had successfully navigated countless challenges over the past 3 years, balancing commercial success with community benefit. But each new phase brought fresh tests of their model's resilience. What's their timeline for a response? He asked. They've requested an answer within 30 days, Sarah replied. And they've made it clear this is their final approach. If we decline, they'll focus their investment elsewhere. $500 million would transform this community overnight, Meredith pointed out. Invested properly, the returns could fund development for generations, regardless of how long the diamond deposit lasts. Or we could maintain independence and develop at our own pace, Ben countered. We've overcome every technical challenge so far. Jackson nodded thoughtfully. Let's take time to consider all angles. I want detailed analyses of both scenarios, accepting their offer versus independent development. And we need to consult the community. This isn't a decision the leadership team makes alone. As they left the meeting, Sarah linked her arm through Jackson's. You've got that look, she observed. The one you get when you're seeing a third option no one else has considered yet. Jackson smiled. Maybe let's discuss it tonight after the dedication ceremony. The ceremony itself was a testament to how far Pinecrest had come. Hundreds of community members gathered to celebrate the opening of the center. Named in honor of Roy Reed, the governor praised the Pinecrest model as a template for responsible resource development. Local children performed songs and presented artwork depicting their visions for the community's future. As Jackson stood at the podium to deliver his remarks, he looked out at the faces before him, miners who had discovered dignity in their work, families who had found security after generations of economic uncertainty, young people who could now imagine futures in their hometown rather than being forced to leave for opportunity. 3 years ago, he began, when we discovered diamonds beneath this mountain, we faced a fundamental choice. We could extract wealth quickly, benefiting a few, or we could build something lasting that would benefit all. The easy path was clear, sell to the highest bidder and walk away. The harder path required us to reimagine what a mining operation could be, to prove that extraction and exploitation aren't synonymous. He gestured to the building around them. This center represents that vision, not just a place for community gathering, but a symbol of what's possible when we reject false choices. We didn't have to choose between economic development and environmental protection, between profit and purpose, between efficiency and equity. We found a third path that honors all these values. What Jackson didn't share with the audience was the new challenge. They now faced whether to maintain independence at the cost of slower development or accept Continental's offer and accelerate their progress with outside resources. That conversation would come in the days ahead, through town halls and community forums, advisory board meetings and kitchen table discussions. That evening, as Jackson and Sarah sat on their cabin porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and purple, they finally had a moment to discuss the third option Jackson had been contemplating. Continental wants our asset, Jackson began, but what they really need is our model. Their traditional approach is becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. Community resistance, regulatory hurdles, reputational challenges. What if instead of selling to them, we acquire partial ownership of Continental? Sarah raised an eyebrow. You want us to buy into a multi-billion-dollar mining conglomerate? With what resources? Not with cash, Jackson explained, his excitement building as he articulated the idea that had been forming. With expertise and social license. We approach their shareholders with a proposal to exchange a significant stake in our operation, say 30% for a 10% stake in Continental, with board representation and a mandate to transform their corporate practices. A reverse takeover, Sarah mused, considering the audacity of the proposal. Not of control, but of culture. Exactly. We become the change agent within one of the largest resource companies in the world. We don't just protect our community, we create a model that can transform dozens of mining communities globally. Sarah thought through the implications. Hargrove would never agree to this. It challenges everything about how he's operated for decades. Hargrove isn't Continental, Jackson countered. He's near retirement age. Their board has younger members who understand that the industry is changing. Their shareholders are increasingly concerned about environmental, social, and governance issues. We represent a path forward that addresses those concerns. The idea was revolutionary, a community-owned enterprise using its moral authority and innovative model to influence a global corporation from within, rather than being absorbed by it. The details would require extensive negotiation and creative financial engineering, but the core concept was sound. Over the following weeks, Jackson and the leadership team developed the proposal in detail. They engaged financial advisors who specialized in unconventional corporate structures, attorneys with expertise in shareholder advocacy, and communication strategists who could articulate the vision to diverse audiences. When they finally presented their counterproposal to Continental, the response was predictable: initial rejection, followed by curious reconsideration as the potential benefits became clear. Continental faced growing resistance at proposed mining sites worldwide. Their reputation among environmental and community advocates created costly delays and challenges. The Pinecrest model offered a solution to these systemic problems. Richard Hargrove, as anticipated, was the strongest opponent within Continental. But even he recognized that the industry was evolving in ways that his traditional approach struggled to address. After 3 months of intensive negotiation, a framework agreement emerged. Pinecrest would exchange 25% ownership for an 8% stake in Continental, 2 board seats, and the creation of a new community development division that would implement Pinecrest practices across Continental's global operations. The evening before the final signing, Jackson visited his uncle's grave in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the town. The simple headstone bore only Roy's name, dates, and the inscription, "Guardian of the Mountain." "I'm not sure if this is what you envisioned, Uncle Roy," Jackson said quietly, placing a small rough diamond on the headstone. "But I think you'd understand. Sometimes protecting something means allowing it to grow beyond what you initially imagined." As he stood there in the fading light, Jackson reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. From a desperate veteran facing financial ruin, to the architect of a corporate transformation that could impact communities around the world. The inheritance that had seemed worthless had yielded value beyond calculation, not just in monetary terms, but in purpose, in community, in proving that different choices were possible. The signing ceremony took place in the community center, with representatives from Continental joining the Pinecrest leadership team and community board. As flashbulbs popped and journalists recorded the historic agreement, Jackson felt a profound sense of both accomplishment and responsibility. They weren't selling out. They were scaling up, extending their vision to communities far beyond their Appalachian Valley. Under the agreement, Pinecrest would maintain majority control of its local operation, while gaining influence over Continental's global practices. The community trust would receive significant ongoing revenue, securing the town's future regardless of how long the diamond deposit lasted. And Jackson would divide his time between local operations and his new role heading Continental's Community Development Division, bringing the Pinecrest approach to mining communities from South Africa to Australia, Peru to Mongolia. 6 months after the agreement was finalized, Jackson found himself in a remote village in Botswana, standing with local leaders beside a diamond operation that had long been a source of tension between the community and Continental. The transformation was already visible: local residents trained for skilled positions, transparent profit-sharing arrangements established, environmental monitoring systems operated by community members. "This is just the beginning," Jackson told the village elders as they toured the redesigned facilities. "Your knowledge of this land and its needs is essential to sustainable operation. This isn't about extraction alone, it's about creating lasting value for everyone involved." An elder woman, her face etched with the wisdom of decades, studied Jackson carefully. "Many companies have come with promises," she said. "What makes yours different?" Jackson shared the story of Pinecrest, of his uncle's vision, of the community that had transformed a worthless inheritance into a model for global change. "We're not just implementing policies," he explained. "We're changing the fundamental relationship between resource companies and the places where they operate. And we're proving that it's not just morally right, it's better business." The woman nodded slowly. "We will judge by actions, not words. But your story gives reason for hope." Upon returning to Pinecrest, Jackson found a community continuing to evolve and thrive. The mine operation had expanded, accessing the deeper diamond deposits with advanced technology developed through the Continental Partnership. But mining was no longer the sole focus of the town's identity. A diversification initiative had fostered new enterprises, advanced manufacturing, specialized educational programs, sustainable tourism. The community was building resilience that would outlast the mineral resource. Emma, now 14, had established a youth leadership program that brought teenagers from mining communities worldwide to Pinecrest to learn about sustainable development. Liam, 11, had developed an award-winning science project on reclamation techniques for former mine lands. Sarah had expanded her role beyond the diamond operation, establishing a consulting firm that helped other communities maximize benefit from local resources while minimizing environmental impact. Her team of experts, many drawn from Pinecrest residents who had developed specialized skills through the mine, now advised communities across Appalachia and beyond. 5 years to the day after Jackson had first discovered the hidden diamond chamber, the community gathered for a special anniversary celebration. The event wasn't held at the mine site or even at the community center, but at the newly completed Pinecrest Learning Campus, an innovative educational facility that combined traditional academics with practical skills training, environmental stewardship, and entrepreneurial development. As Jackson stood before the gathering, he saw not just what they had built, but what they were becoming: not a mining town with a temporary boom, but a resilient community with diverse strengths and a sustainable future. 5 years ago, he began, I was a bankrupt veteran with few prospects and little hope. The inheritance I received seemed worthless at first glance, a played-out coal mine in a region that prosperity had forgotten. What I discovered behind that collapsed wall was valuable beyond measure, but not just because of the diamonds themselves. He paused, looking out at the faces of people who had become not just neighbors, but partners in an extraordinary journey. The true discovery was that value often lies hidden beneath the surface, not just in mountains but in communities and in ourselves. We found worth in what others had dismissed. We revealed potential where others saw only limitations. And in doing so, we didn't just extract wealth from the earth, we created wealth of a more enduring kind. The Pinecrest model had extended far beyond the small Appalachian town. 12 communities across 4 continents had now implemented variations of the approach, each adapting the core principles to their unique contexts. Continental's corporate practices had evolved significantly under the influence of Pinecrest leadership, with measurable improvements in environmental performance, community relations, and even long-term profitability. More importantly, the people of Pinecrest had discovered capabilities they never knew they possessed. Former coal miners had become skilled diamond technicians, environmental monitors, and reclamation specialists. Young people who might once have fled at the first opportunity now saw possibilities in their hometown. The community had developed confidence in its ability to shape its own future, regardless of what resources might be discovered or depleted. As the celebration continued into the evening, with music and dancing under strings of lights in the campus courtyard, Jackson found a quiet moment with Sarah away from the crowd. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't looked behind that rockfall? He asked, watching Emma teach a group of younger children a dance. Sarah considered the question thoughtfully. I think eventually someone would have found the diamonds, she replied. But they wouldn't have been discovered by someone who understood their true value. Which was? Not what they could buy, she said simply, but what they could build. Not just wealth, but worth. Jackson nodded, feeling the truth of her words. The bankrupt veteran had discovered far more than a $330 million diamond deposit in that seemingly worthless coal mine. He had uncovered purpose, community, and the profound realization that the most valuable resources often remain hidden until someone has the courage to look beyond appearances, to break through walls others accept as impenetrable, and to recognize possibilities where others see only limitations. As the music played and their community celebrated not just what they had found, but what they had created, Jackson understood that this was the true legacy of his uncle's unusual inheritance, not the glittering crystals embedded in ancient rock, but the demonstration that with vision, persistence, and collective effort, apparent worthlessness could be transformed into immeasurable value. changing not just one family's trajectory, but the future of communities around the world. A decade after the discovery of the diamond deposit, Pinecrest had evolved from a mining town into something far more enduring, a center for innovation in sustainable resource development. The original mine operation continued to thrive, but it was now just one element in a diverse economic ecosystem. The 10th anniversary celebration, held in the expansive community plaza that had once been an abandoned coal loading yard, brought together people from across the globe who had been touched by what had become known as the Pinecrest effect. Jackson Reed, now in his mid-40s with touches of gray at his temples, stood slightly apart from the crowd, observing rather than commanding attention. The years had softened his military bearing without diminishing his presence. He watched as Emma, now 20, confidently guided a delegation of United Nations officials through an exhibit showcasing the global impact of the Pinecrest approach to resource management. "Your daughter has your gift for leadership," remarked a familiar voice. Jackson turned to find Richard Hargrove standing beside him, the former Continental CEO, now well into his 70s, but still sharp-eyed and formidable. "She has her mother's patience," Jackson replied with a smile, "and her own unique vision." The two men had moved from adversaries to reluctant allies and finally to something approaching friendship over the years. Hargrove had initially resisted the changes Jackson introduced to Continental's global operations, but as the results proved both ethically and financially sound, his resistance had gradually transformed into respect. "I underestimated you, Reed," Hargrove admitted, watching the diverse crowd, local residents mingling with international visitors, corporate executives engaging with environmental advocates. "I saw only the diamonds, not the possibilities they represented." "A common mistake," Jackson acknowledged. "Seeing value only in what can be extracted, not in what can be created." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Liam, now 17 and nearly as tall as his father. The teenager's passion for engineering had evolved into groundbreaking work on diamond-based quantum computing applications, a project that had attracted attention from major technology companies. "Dad, the governor's team just arrived," Liam reported. "And Dr. Chen wants to review the presentation one more time before the symposium starts." As Jackson excused himself to attend to his duties as host, Hargrove watched him go with a thoughtful expression. The former military man who had inherited a seemingly worthless coal mine had transformed not just his community, but an entire industry's approach to resource development. The Pinecrest Continental Partnership had proven that ethical practices and profitability could be mutually reinforcing rather than opposing forces. The symposium that afternoon, held in the Pinecrest Innovation Center, brought together scientists, industry leaders, policymakers, and community advocates to discuss the future of resource development. The featured presentation, delivered jointly by Jackson and Sarah, outlined what they called the regenerative extraction model, an approach that ensured resource development created more value than it consumed across environmental, social, and economic dimensions. "Traditional extractive industries operate on a depletion model," Sarah explained to the packed auditorium. "Resources are removed, wealth flows outward, and communities are left with diminished natural capital and few lasting benefits. The Pinecrest model inverts this relationship. Extraction becomes a catalyst for regeneration rather than depletion." Jackson continued, 10 years ago, many believed this approach was idealistic but impractical. Today, the evidence is clear. Operations following the Pinecrest principles consistently outperform traditional models on both financial and non-financial metrics. The presentation included case studies from mining communities across 4 continents that had implemented variations of the Pinecrest approach. Former conflict zones where resource extraction had fueled violence were now showcasing collaborative management. Regions previously defined by poverty, despite mineral wealth, were developing diverse, sustainable economies. As compelling as these global examples were, the most powerful evidence was Pinecrest itself. The community had transcended its identity as a diamond mining town to become a living laboratory for sustainable development. The Pinecrest Educational Institute now attracted students from around the world to study regenerative economics and community-centered resource management. The Advanced Materials Research Center developed applications for diamonds beyond gemstones, creating high-tech jobs that complemented the mining operation. Most significantly, the wealth generated by the mine had been invested in what community members called perpetual assets, renewable energy infrastructure, regenerative agriculture, educational endowments, and a community-owned investment fund that would continue generating returns long after the last diamond was extracted. Following the symposium, the anniversary celebration continued with a community dinner held under open skies. Long tables stretched across the plaza, bringing together miners and executives, local farmers and international visitors, children and elders, all equal participants in the community's achievement. As twilight descended and lanterns glowed across the gathering, Ben Harlow, now in his 70s with a snow-white beard, tapped his glass for attention. As Jackson's earliest ally in Pinecrest and the mine's operations director for many years, Ben had earned the right to speak for the community. 10 years ago, he began, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet crowd, a man drove up this mountain with his family, looking for any kind of hope. What he found was a collapsing coal mine that everyone, including his uncle, had written off as worthless. Ben paused, his gaze finding Jackson among the tables. But Jackson Reed saw something the rest of us missed. Not just the diamonds hidden behind that collapsed wall, but the potential in this community that had been overlooked and underestimated for generations. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. The miracle of Pinecrest isn't just what was discovered beneath the mountain, Ben continued. It's what was revealed within us, capabilities we didn't know we possessed, strength we didn't realize we had, possibilities we couldn't see until someone believed in them enough to make them real. As Ben yielded the floor, others rose to share their stories. The former coal miner who now headed the environmental monitoring program, the high school teacher whose innovative curriculum had been adopted nationwide, the young entrepreneur whose sustainable forestry initiative employed dozens of local residents. These testimonials underscored the deeper transformation that had occurred in Pinecrest. Not just economic revival, but a fundamental shift in how people perceived themselves and their future. The community had moved from dependency to agency, from extraction to creation, from resignation to possibility. Later that evening, as the celebration continued with music and dancing under the stars, Jackson and Sarah slipped away for a quiet moment. They followed a familiar path up the hillside to Roy Reed's grave, now part of a peaceful memorial garden maintained by the community. 10 years, Sarah mused, her hand linked with Jackson's as they looked out over the town below, its lights twinkling in the darkness. Sometimes I still expect to wake up in that rental in Lexington, wondering how we'll make it through another month. Jackson nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Their journey from desperate circumstances to global influence seemed almost dreamlike in retrospect. Uncle Roy knew what he was doing when he left me that worthless mine. He was playing a much longer game than I realized. Do you think he knew about the diamonds? Sarah asked, a question they had debated over the years. I think he suspected, Jackson replied after a thoughtful pause. But I don't think that's why he left me the mine. I think he recognized something in me that I hadn't yet discovered in myself. The capacity to see value where others saw only depletion, to build where others would extract. Their conversation was interrupted by a call from below. Liam was waving to them from the edge of the celebration, pointing excitedly toward the innovation center where a special demonstration had been prepared, the unveiling of the diamond-based quantum computing prototype his team had developed in partnership with researchers from MIT and Stanford. As they made their way back down the hill, Sarah squeezed Jackson's hand. From bankrupt veteran to transforming global resource development. Not bad for 10 years' work. Jackson chuckled. I just followed the path that opened up. The real transformation was in how we defined value, seeing beyond the immediate to the potential, beyond scarcity to abundance. The quantum computing demonstration exemplified this philosophy perfectly. The diamonds from the mine, rather than becoming mere decorative gems, were being utilized for their unique quantum properties, potentially revolutionizing computing in ways that could address humanity's most complex challenges, from climate modeling to medical research. Liam's face shone with pride as he explained the technology to the gathered audience. His journey from the withdrawn 7-year-old who had first arrived in Pinecrest to the confident young innovator before them reflected the community's broader transformation. He had grown up in an environment where creating value was valued more highly than consuming it, where problems were seen as opportunities, and where worth was measured by contribution rather than acquisition. The following day brought the most significant announcement of the anniversary celebration. Jackson and Sarah, together with the community board and their partners at Continental, unveiled the Pinecrest Foundation, an endowed institution dedicated to spreading the regenerative development model worldwide. This foundation represents our commitment to ensuring that the lessons of Pinecrest extend beyond our community and beyond our lifetime, Jackson explained to the assembled media and community members. With initial funding of $1 billion drawn from diamond revenues and matching corporate contributions, the foundation will support communities globally in developing their own versions of the Pinecrest model. The foundation would provide not just financial resources but technical assistance, educational opportunities, and policy advocacy. Its first initiative was already underway, a partnership with 12 resource-dependent communities across Appalachia to develop regenerative economies based on their unique assets and capabilities. As the formal announcement concluded, Dr. Elaine Chun, the mineralogist who had first confirmed Jackson's diamond discovery a decade earlier, approached him with a bemused smile. When you brought that rock sample to my office, I never imagined it would lead to all this, she said, gesturing to the bustling community around them. I thought I was looking at an interesting geological anomaly, not the catalyst for a global movement. That's the thing about value, Jackson replied. It's rarely found in the obvious places. The true worth of those diamonds wasn't in their clarity or carat weight. It was in what they allowed us to create together. In the weeks following the anniversary celebration, as international visitors departed and media attention gradually shifted elsewhere, Pinecrest settled back into its daily rhythms. But something had subtly shifted in the community's collective consciousness. The 10-year milestone had provided an opportunity to reflect not just on what they had accomplished, but on the principles that had guided their journey. These principles had been distilled into what community members called the Pinecrest Wisdom, a set of insights that had emerged from their experience. Value often lies hidden beneath the surface, in places and people others have dismissed as worthless. True wealth is not what you extract, but what you create, not just for yourself, but for generations to come. Challenges reveal capabilities we didn't know we possessed, strengths we couldn't access until necessity demanded them. The apparent choice between profit and purpose, between economic success and ethical integrity, is a false dichotomy. The most sustainable path embraces both. Communities contain within themselves the seeds of their own regeneration, needing not rescue from outside, but recognition and nurturing of their inherent potential. These insights had transformed not just how Pinecrest approached resource development, but how its residents viewed themselves and their future. The community that had once defined itself by what it had lost jobs, population, hope now defined itself by what it was creating. One evening, a month after the anniversary events, Jackson took a solitary walk through town. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves. He passed the Innovation Center where lights still burned in Liam's lab. the community plaza where a farmer's market would appear at dawn, the Education Institute where Sarah was developing new programs for community leaders from resource-dependent regions worldwide. His path led him eventually to the mine entrance, now modernized but still recognizable as the dilapidated opening he had first encountered a decade ago. A security guard nodded respectfully as Jackson approached. "Evening, Mr. Reed. Just checking in on operations?" "Just walking," Jackson replied with a smile. Remembering. The guard unlocked the gate, allowing Jackson to enter the visitor's observation area that overlooked the main mining floor. The operation ran 24 hours a day now, with 3 rotating shifts of workers using advanced technology to extract diamonds with minimal environmental impact. From this vantage point, he could see the west tunnel where he had first discovered the hidden chamber behind the collapsed wall. That moment of discovery had altered not just his family's trajectory, but an entire community's future. Yet the true discovery hadn't been the diamonds themselves, but the recognition of possibilities that others had overlooked, the potential in abandoned places, in overlooked resources, and people whose capabilities had never been fully acknowledged. As Jackson prepared to leave, he noticed something he hadn't seen before, a simple plaque mounted beside the observation area, installed during the recent anniversary renovations. It bore a quote from his Uncle Roy's journal, words written decades before the diamonds were discovered. "The true value of a mine lies not in what is taken from it, but in what it reveals about those who work it, their courage, their persistence, their capacity to see beyond the obvious to the possible." Jackson ran his fingers across the engraved words, understanding now that his uncle's legacy went far beyond the physical property he had inherited. Roy Reed had preserved not just a mine, but a philosophy, a belief that true worth often remained hidden until someone had the vision to recognize it and the courage to uncover it. As he walked back toward town under a sky brilliant with stars, Jackson reflected on the journey from bankruptcy to abundance, from scarcity to sufficiency, from extraction to creation. The worthless coal mine had yielded not just diamonds but wisdom, not just wealth but worth, not just resources but regeneration. The path that had seemed like a desperate last resort had become a journey of discovery, revealing not just what lay hidden in the mountain, but what lay dormant in the human spirit, waiting to be awakened by possibility. The collapsed wall that most would have accepted as an impassable barrier had concealed not just a $330 million diamond deposit, but a doorway to transformation for one bankrupt veteran, for a struggling Appalachian community, and ultimately for resource-dependent regions around the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.